A wage earner sells an appreciated stock for $1 million and immediately owes capital gains tax on the profit, sometimes 20% or more, gone before the money even reaches their bank account. In fact, for most working professionals, taxation is an automated, unavoidable reality. Every single paycheck has federal, state, and local taxes deducted at the source before they can even decide how to spend their hard-earned money. But a billionaire holding the exact same stock can pull out $1 million in cash and owe absolutely nothing. Not because the rules are different for each of them, but because the billionaire never sold anything at all. That single distinction, selling versus borrowing, is the foundation of one of the most talked about wealth strategies in modern finance. One that shows up again and again in tax policy debates, congressional hearings, and the balance sheets of the world's richest people. It even has a name investors use casually among themselves: buy, borrow, die. It sounds almost too simple to be legal. It is legal, and every piece of it rests on tax rules that have existed for decades, applying to everyone equally on paper, while functioning very differently depending on how much collateral you have. The first step is the part almost everyone already does, at least on a small scale. Buy assets that are expected to grow in value: stocks, real estate, a stake in a business, and simply hold them. Under the tax code, growth in value isn't taxed until it's realized, meaning until you actually sell. If you buy a share of a tech company for $100 and 10 years later it is worth $1,000, you have $900 in unrealized gains. This distinction is crucial. Under tax law, paper wealth is not considered taxable income. A stock that doubles in your portfolio costs you nothing in taxes as long as you never cash it in. This is true for anyone with a basic retirement account. However, the wealthy version of this step is just the same mechanic, applied to a portfolio worth hundreds of millions or billions of dollars instead of thousands. While a middle-class family might watch their retirement fund grow slowly to secure their future, a founder of a multi-billion-dollar corporation watches their equity grow to a scale that can influence global markets, all without triggering a single dollar in tax liability. They do not need to diversify by selling. Their wealth lies safely locked in the compounding engine of their own success. The second step is where the strategy actually earns its reputation, because it solves a fundamental problem that would otherwise force the wealthy to sell. Eventually, everyone needs cash for a house, a business venture, philanthropy, or simply to fund their daily lifestyle. The obvious, intuitive way to get it is to sell some of your appreciated stock. But doing so immediately triggers a capital gains tax on the entire profit, cutting a massive percentage off the top. So instead of selling, the wealthy borrow against what they already own using a specialized financial tool called a securities-backed line of credit, or SBLOC. Major investment banks, the kind of firms that manage money exclusively for the ultra-wealthy, are more than happy to lend against a stable stock portfolio. They will routinely lend somewhere between 70% and 90% of its value, using the shares themselves as collateral. Why are banks so eager to do this? Because it is incredibly safe for them. If the borrower defaults on the loan, the bank can instantly liquidate the stock portfolio to recover their money. Because of this low risk, the interest rates on these lines of credit are often incredibly low, far lower than the rates on credit cards or standard home mortgages. Real estate works the exact same way through a process known as a cash-out refinance. An investor can pull equity out of an apartment building they already own, keep collecting the rent, keep owning the asset, and never trigger a taxable sale. Here's the part that makes this more than just a clever loan. Under US tax law, borrowed money is not legally considered income. You can pull $10 million out of a stock portfolio through a loan, and the IRS treats it exactly the same as if you'd pulled $10, because legally it isn't a gain, it is a debt you are obligated to repay. Meanwhile, the underlying stock portfolio doesn't stop working. It keeps growing, often at an annual rate of 8 to 10%. If the interest being charged on your loan is only 3 or 4%, the whole maneuver functions less like spending money and more like a second investment running in parallel. This is what economists call positive financial leverage. You are essentially living off of borrowed money that is costing you less than what your investments are earning. You get richer while spending millions of dollars a year. This is where the growth in these loans becomes highly visible in the numbers. Over the past decade, major wealth management arms of banks have reported that balances on securities-backed lines of credit have skyrocketed. More of the ultra-wealthy have quietly adopted this playbook to fund their lifestyles or purchase luxury real estate, all without ever showing a high taxable income. The third step is the one that turns a clever tax deferral strategy into something closer to permanent tax avoidance. When a typical borrower eventually passes away, you might assume their accumulated debt would finally catch up with them, forcing a massive estate sale and a giant tax bill. But the tax code has a built-in escape hatch. When the borrower dies, their heirs do not inherit the original cost basis of those assets. Instead, they inherit them at their current market value on the day of the owner's death. This mechanism is known as the step-up in basis. Every single dollar of growth that happened during the original owner's lifetime, the exact gains that would have triggered a massive multi-million-dollar tax bill if sold, simply disappears for tax purposes. Let's look at the math. Imagine a tech founder who started a company decades ago with an initial investment of $1 million. Over the years, that stock grows to be worth $50 million. If that founder were to sell the stock during their lifetime, they would owe capital gains tax on roughly $49 million of profit. But if they hold those shares until death and pass them to their heirs, the heirs' cost basis instantly resets to $50 million. If the heirs decide to sell the shares the very next day, their taxable gain is calculated as 50 million minus 50 million, meaning their taxable gain is exactly zero. The heirs can then immediately sell a portion of the inherited assets, pay off whatever outstanding loans the deceased owner accumulated during their lifetime, and pocket the rest. The debt is settled, the bank is paid, and the inheritance transfers untouched. It's worth being entirely honest about how this looks from the outside, because in popular financial media, the strategy is often described as if it's a magic trick available to anyone clever enough to try it. In practice, it requires exactly the kind of capital most people don't have. Lenders typically want a portfolio worth well into 6 figures at minimum before offering this kind of credit line. And the real version of this strategy, the one moving real systemic money, operates on portfolios worth tens or hundreds of millions. Furthermore, there is genuine catastrophic risk buried inside it. If the stock market falls sharply, a loan that once looked comfortably small relative to your portfolio can suddenly trigger a margin call. When this happens, the bank reserves the right to immediately sell your shares to pay down the debt. This forces a sale at exactly the worst possible moment, when stock prices are down and the capital gains tax you spent your entire life trying to avoid suddenly becomes due anyway. Wealth advisors generally caution against borrowing more than 15 to 25% of an account's value for exactly this reason. There's also an important correction to the popular version of this story. Economists who have studied how the wealthiest Americans actually behave have found that borrowing this aggressively is less common than the sensationalized buy, borrow, die narrative suggests. For most ultra-wealthy households, the dominant pattern isn't heavy borrowing to fund an extravagant lifestyle. It is simply not selling, letting gains pile up untaxed for decades, and relying on the step-up in basis to erase them at death. Perhaps we should call it buy, save, die instead. The borrowing piece is real, and it is undoubtedly growing, but the far larger and far quieter driver of how the rich avoid taxes on their fortunes is the simple, disciplined practice of never realizing a gain in the first place. Either way, the underlying mechanism is the same. a tax code that only taxes wealth at the moment it changes hands, built on the historic assumption that everyone eventually needs to sell to survive. The wealthy with enough collateral and enough patience have found a way to never quite need to. It is also why this specific loophole keeps resurfacing in political debates. Lawmakers have repeatedly proposed taxing unrealized gains or eliminating the step-up in basis entirely. But so far, none of those proposals have successfully passed, and the mechanism remains exactly as it has always been: perfectly legal, quietly enormous in scale, and almost entirely invisible to anyone who isn't already wealthy enough to use it. If stories like this one stay with you, the ones where a system this powerful was built so quietly that most people never noticed, subscribe, because that's exactly what this channel is built around. And if you've got a question about how another part of the financial system actually works, drop it in the comments. Some of the best topics on this channel started as a suggestion from someone watching.